We just resume our agenda, please, and we were going to hear, is it from you again, Mark, on the conflicts of interest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the second policy brought to this committee today, and again, I guess it's important policy because there's high expectations publicly around the appropriate management of conflicts of interest for staff members. So this policy, I guess, sets out the framework and the approach to manage those conflicts. Obviously, it's not wrong to have a conflict of interest, but the key is that it's managed appropriately and that the appropriate conversations go on between the people that need to have them. So again, this policy is sort of principle based. It's based on guidance from the Office of the Auditor General and the Audit Office, and all of that information has been collated into the policy. There's quite an extensive definition of what a conflict of interest is in the policy, and again, in terms of the report, it's sort of outlined the key framework and approach, sort of from section 9 onwards. And I guess the central aspect of this policy is that ongoing relationship and dialogue between employees and their managers or whoever else is involved to ensure that the appropriate approach is taken. So again, the next steps of this is confirmation of the policy, and both from yourselves and the Chief Executive, and then similar to the sensitive expenditure approach, there'll be training and roll out across the organisation through the risk and assurance function.
Thanks for that, Mark. Again, appreciate the work. Can I open up for questions or comments on the policy or the general approach? Yes, Janice.
I liked the policy. I thought that it was fine. The only question I had was $50 seems awfully low.
For a gift?
Yeah.
What would you have in mind?
I'd have had $200.
Pardon?
$200.
$200?
Yep.
Hey, she's from the big smoke. No, it's good. I'm glad you said it, Janice. Put it out there. Why not? You feel that's the right amount? Yeah.
It saves, sometimes it depends on how good you are, how many gifts you get and all that sort of stuff. But if you're inundated with gifts and it's creating a huge amount of work, I'd lift the level.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
I would agree. I mean, it's a balancing act, isn't it, between the gift and I guess whatever's appropriate in the situation. But $50 these days is a pretty small amount. I don't know. Would the Chief Executive wants to comment?
Oh, well, look, thank you, because actually I was the one, I think they had 150 or 200, and I was the one that brought it down. And the reason I did that is actually we're trying really hard to say to people, we don't want any gifts at all. If you are, these conflicts arise, and there's a difference between a gift, say, from a charitable or community organisation that wants to acknowledge something that's done, but when they come from consultants or contractors, we actually want to send a message that there's one reason they're engaged, and that's because we believe they provide the best value for money, and gifts start to make it murky and complicated, and really all we're doing is we get people who bring in a box of roses, chocolates at Christmas time or something and want to share it around the team. We want to acknowledge that. But so we're happy to look at it, but I'm very apprehensive around any sort of gift. It makes me uneasy that we...
Pete, I don't think the value of the gift makes much difference to the ethos around everything that you just said. It means, though, that if someone wants to bring in a hamper to share amongst a team, you can accept it and not have to put it... Well,
Yeah.
I don't think the value actually makes much difference to the ethos of what you're describing.
No, but actually the point you raise is right on target, because at this time of year, someone might bring in a hamper and it gets shared out amongst the team. And we want to and the team put it out and it's got some cheese and crackers and whatever else, peanuts or chips or something. And you want to share it out, and you don't want them going to the effort when it's just a gesture of goodwill from someone. So we can have a look at that and maybe raise it up a bit, but we're conscious of not allowing a limit that could draw us a jaundiced perspective, if you like.
Well, I'd be happy, Bede, if we left this as an open suggestion with you. I don't think we should try and wordsmith or even change it. What I'm hearing, there are two things. One is ethos and appropriateness, and the other is there a dollar level that goes with that isn't unduly burdensome for you administratively? And perhaps, unless there's contrary views, we can leave it at that with you. You've got a sense where the committee's going. There's no doubt about the ethos. Keep it in there, and just check that it's there, but work out whether in fact 50 is the right thing. Anything else people would like to raise about it? Just like you, John, Nigel.
Well, the only thing I would, I forget where it is, but with the changes with the IRD in regard to the $50 threshold going to 200, there's some alignment. I think there's probably recognition that $50 is not a lot nowadays, so I'd be comfortable for it to increase. But there again, I take your point, Bede, you're the one that it falls on, and when I'm finding someone to blame later on, it'll be you. So, so I'm happy to leave it with you.
Well, it's about to go to $10. Is it Bede on that count? Anything about the cup of coffee? No, look, I think we can leave it there. I don't think there's any particular IRD issue here that strikes me. It is really the probity and the ethos, as we've discussed, which we want to endorse, and you just open to the pragmatism of how you put that in place, Pete. Yeah, John.
If I might just raise it, there is also the perception risk. If you have too big a limit, like $200, someone receiving a $100 whiskey bottle. Mm-hmm. So you've got to be very careful about the limits you impose based on perception of what type of gifts they receive. Mm.
Yes, you're quite right. You buy a good bottle of whiskey for under $200. And that would be a perception issue. And I think that's the point that you're trying to make here, Bede. So leave that in your hands. Anything else people like to raise? Yes, Jason?
Yeah, just following on from John's point, that's good. What do other councils do from your perspective in this space?
Gee whiz, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the gift. I would have actually, to be honest, I would have thought 50 to 100 would be roughly the number that most councils would go for, and that's probably at the end, Jason, of the perception risk that you were talking about, John. The one way in which you could assess this is a particular problem at 50. I mean, is it creating an administrative burden that you don't need to have? Now, that's the other thing to think about as far as that's concerned. Can I just raise 2 or 3 points, please, if that's okay, Mark? No, that sounds good. I just want to make certain, this is about staff or employee conflict of interest, isn't it? This is not about councillors, correct?
That's correct, yep.
I think it should say that in the heading. Okay, because conflicts of interest is often about about elected members. This is about, because I mean, it's in there. I mean, I went to what do you define as an officer? So I think it should be called an employee conflict. One of the points here that I just wanted to note, and I would just want to be careful on, was I think somewhere I gained the impression, there was a suggestion that elected members, this is why I wanted to ask this question, don't need a management plan. Well, often they do, actually. That's for a separate policy, but under the elected members' conflict of interest, if there is a conflict, you generally have to have a management plan with it as well. So I'd hate us to think that it's only related to employees, but it's correct that you've got it here for employees. Two other points, 10.4.1 and 3, you quite rightly raised back to the gifts thing here. We're going all over the place on the gifts. 10.4.3, you raise the issue of frequency. So, 5 lots of $50 in the space of a month, and you're over 250, and you're trying to get at that sort of repetitive situation. but you don't actually describe what is frequency. And I mean, I know it's a matter of judgment, but I'll just leave it as a question mark with you as to whether there's a sense of what does frequency mean. And that would be useful. It could be in the definition section. And my old favourite, or which should be an and, is an 11.4, which is again related to your position, Bede, that if it is a decision's needed, it probably should be both the Mayor and the Chair of the Risk Committee, please. Rightio, brilliant. And I just had a question really for these forms. I presume they're all online, Mark. It's easy for staff to do.
That would be the intention. Yep, they're not currently online, but once
Not currently online?
once
I mean, look, I have been subject, when I was in the OAG, to very strict conflict of interest rules. Probably $20 in those days, which is probably more my age rather than anything else. But it was all online, and it was the best way to deal with it, including the management plan that came out of it was all online, being it was just done. The risk just makes life easier for the risk and assurance manager. Okay, brilliant, good. Okay, can we just move then please to the recommendations, which is to endorse. I think it's important that I don't think anybody's being too worried about the with amendments, so let's just include with the minor amendments, we endorse and recommend you adopt the Conflicts of Interest Policy 2022, which I think we're going to call the Employee Conflict of Interest, or whatever you want to call it. But I'll call it, for the sake of the resolution, the Employee. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Anybody will do this? Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Scott. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right, post-lunch, let's keep it going, guys. Tax risk, this is a very interesting report, Jason. Love this one.
I knew somebody would love this one.
You just couldn't pick who it was.
I knew it would be Bruce.
Well,
but,
no, there might be a few more interested in this one, mate, so keep it going.
And look, I was going to reiterate what Bruce was going to say. This is a really important report, actually, and there's some quite meaty stuff in there as well for the committee to, I guess, get their head around and to understand. And this is our once yearly report back according to our audit and risk work program. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in it. I'm going to get Azura to walk through it because I think there's some important stuff to cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So obviously this has got a number of elements to it, so I'll just walk through the report and then we can take questions as we go. So at a high level, just to say that for the year ended 30th of June, all taxes risks has been mentioned in this report, and all have been paid within the timeframes, and penalties and interests that have resulted were as a result of IRD putting them in and then reversing them. So we'll talk through a little bit about that as we walk through it, and also just to confirm that PwC are our tax agent and they've been advising us throughout this process. So at that point was for us to go back, talk to our CCOs, and then come back and just report on how that went, sort of in terms of adoption. So just to highlight here that we have gone back and we are progressing with TDHL. However, there are a number of discussion points on this that we're working through. They have not adopted yet, and so just want to highlight that the Chief Executive is working through that process. And in terms of Venture Timaru, they are working through it. They just haven't had a chance to get back to us. And of course, AST will just deal with separately, just in terms of all the other items with AST. So they have approved the earlier versions, and obviously we look after some of that, so that's not an issue at this stage. The second item is Downlands GST. Sorry, would you like to take any questions on this before we progress to the next item?
Thank you for that question. Does anybody need to raise a question at this stage? No, keep it going. We'll come back and when we just, after you finish, we will just glance our eye down the updated tax compliance strategy and the comments that we've got there and keep going.
Okay, so the second item is the Downlands GST. So we've also got an attachment there on the compliance. Obviously, in terms of the GST, I'll just talk to GST as a whole because, again, 1 and 2 sort of interrelated. As we've been updating, we have been working through the current GST with our Civica in terms of just the systematic issues that we've been having over the last year or so. And very pleased to say that we have actually now resolved, got to the bottom of all of the systems actions, had a really thorough report as well, which is attached on here in terms of the scope of work, going through the detail of that. And happy to take questions a bit later, just highlighting that we're nearing the closure of that, and a voluntary disclosure is being worked through at the moment that we're just finalising back to IRD. Communications back to IRD has been held already, and they're well aware of the situation and also comfortable with what we're proposing in here. The next item on here is around the Aorangi Stadium Trust, again continuing in the theme of GST. As you can see, there's a detailed report there again. Obviously, this is sort of around the sector, others are going through this process. There's a real question on whether the trust needs to continue, and we've also highlighted, of course, that's going to be a council matter to be discussed in the future. However, there's a lot of feedback that we have received in this area as well. And finally, the last couple of items there's nothing to raise in terms of risks at this point in time. Just highlighting that there's been bits and pieces worked through, so we can take any questions from there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Azora. That's really, really helpful. Okay, can I just perhaps just suggest for members' sake, let's just try and deal with the report and a couple of questions. Perhaps just allow my lead. We'll come back to, I think, particularly those key points you raised. Can I just put us all to 1112, which is the tax risk management strategy for the coming 3 years. Believe it or not, I did actually put my eye across this to try and work through both with the risks that were being, not the risks, the matters that were being dealt with, and what was happening here. Was this sufficient? I just wonder, members, if you have a view. This is the work plan that PwC effectively going to carry out on our behalf. I wonder if there was any comments on that at this stage. It looked pretty good. Azora, you were finding that sort of program supportive to the work that we need to do to reach assurance around tax compliance? Correct,
and especially at the back of all of the work that we've been doing over the last few years, that's sort of where we've arrived at this stage. Of course, open for.
So those independent tax evaluations, GST compliance, POA, that all. I mean, it's basically a rotational basis through.
Correct.
So once every 3 years, you're going to get picked off and dealt with. That seems fine.
Yes.
Good.
At this stage, absolutely.
Great. I'm taking your nod as yes here, Zora. I'm just keen to know. Right, let's deal then. Any questions around tax developments? It's very helpful for your general tax knowledge and update team as to what's happening in the tax world. It shows you that nothing is ever stable and it keeps changing. So that's useful. No questions. Right, can we just move then to the question of the, let me get this right, the Aorangi Stadium Trust. That was the next paper I saw. Any questions from folk on this? I wonder if I could invite it, whether it's unprompted, but any views from you. This seems to be a case of we need to sort this out. And reasonably directive from PW, either give it a taxable activity or do something different in terms of changing it. I wonder if there's been any thinking on this, the chance for thinking on this at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there has, and to cut to the quick on it, I think officers would recommend that that the Aorangi Stadium Trust, the asset, which is the facility, be distributed, which is back to council, and the trust effectively wound up. And inside this financial year would be the advice that officers will provide.
Yeah.
And that then just resolves, there's other issues with that facility as well, not just tax. So,
yeah.
Because you would call it an in-substance subsidiary, even though it's administered by trustees and so on, it is, for all intents and purposes, we give a letter of comfort in terms of the audit report and so on.
Yeah,
So
we take all the risk.
take all the risks, so we will
Yeah.
be looking to bring back a piece of work with the annual report that suggests that the trust be wound up and its assets distributed back into council.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts, folk, from there? No? Oh, Michelle?
Sorry, I was doing a bit of reading on this and I kind of failed to understand the purpose of the trust. Initially it seemed that the purpose was there were community members in there and they were kind of cheerleaders of the development there. And it looked to me that they didn't really own any assets, but then we had allowed for that liability for the earthquake work in there and now the 4 trustees, sorry, there's a lot of questions, now the 4 trustees are just councillors, there's no... So I feel like what it is now has been lost along the way, and it worries me that if we don't sort this out soon, we're going to go off on a path that's hard to unwind. Because my understanding, and I only looked at it quickly from the trustee, was that if you wind it up, it has to be distributed to another charitable organisation, which I'm not sure if the council qualifies as that, but I'm not sure.
Look, through you, Mr. Chair, there's some really good questions embedded in that. The history, I think, was that it was, and others there and would have a better knowledge of its history, but it was in order to try and give it a financial sustainability back and have it as a community funded asset, but it hasn't worked out that way. In actual fact, at the last 2019, when the election of the trustees came up, there was consideration given to whether you would go and get trustees from outside of council, but that there was no, looking at the liabilities that are embedded there, I don't think there'd be many who would want it. Effectively, the council is indemnifying the trustees because there's quite a lot of risk attached to it, not just in terms of the taxable activity under the GST Act, but in terms of its liability as a building. The point about it coming back is, you're quite right, it's a charitable trust, and then if you distribute the assets, it must go back for a purpose that meets one of the heads of charity, and we'd have to get advice, but I suspect that council administering it for the benefit of the community will probably ensure that one of those heads of charity being, I think there's advancement of education, religion, relief of poverty and other purposes beneficial to the community, would probably be satisfied, but we will need advice. To the Mayor's point, if someone wanted it, we'd probably say, have it, but they won't. So there's quite a bit for us to unpick, and we think we should be doing it in the current financial year, because the GST just highlights another risk for us with this that we don't want and don't need to have.
Yes, Michelle.
That leads to my other question was, do we have any idea of the amount of that potential GST liability?
Zara might have the answer to it.
Sorry, the total voluntary disclosure, it's, or the specific to AST?
Specific to AST, it talks about a potential liability.
Yes,
if you
I
found
don't have that on me, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I went and asked about that, and it's quite a lengthy question, but my understanding, looking at Jason and Azura here, is that actually it's not right now a major issue for us, but it will be if we start spending a lot of money on earthquake strengthening, development, etc., when the big numbers really roll in, because the trust has been returning GST on the grants it receives and so on, and the funding. So there has been an output tax going off, which will counterbalance. The big issue is if we started getting big dollars rolling in for earthquake strengthening and the development, that's when the big input credits would arise, and that's when we would be challenged, I suspect. So I don't have a definitive answer. I have made that inquiry, but the advice I've received is it's not an immediate issue, but it's potentially a significant one, which is why we want it tidied up.
So the clear indication is you've read the writing on the wall, and you're going to deal to it, presumably through the process of a formal paper which picks up and nails why essentially it should be wound up and how to do that efficiently.
how to do that efficiently and bring it back inside
Yeah,
formally inside the council stable.
yeah.
Because it is, for all intents and purposes, we
Council.
do
No, I get
everything
that.
on.
No, I get that, V. That's fine. Okay, thank you for that. And then can we just move to the more general GST paper, please? Are there any questions people would like to raise on this, please? This was the one where my eye couldn't help but be attracted to page 127, Azura, where we've got a net GST receivable of $3.5 million. That sounded quite good. If I think receivables coming back my way, I think it's very good. I think, this has clearly been an area where we've still got to get release of this, because I think we've got to prove to the IRD that our systems and processes are in place. But you're indicating that you're comfortable at this point that your systems and processes are now up to speed. You just have to get IRD to accept that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we've worked through our Civica providers as well in terms of
Yes.
updating the reports. Obviously had PwC come in and go through all of the detailed processes as an independent as well. And at the moment, IRD also well aware of the situation. So we're very comfortable at this stage.
Thank you. Good. It does raise the question, did we learn any lessons out of it? It sounds terrible, doesn't it? Of course we learned lessons out of it, but, obviously it was an administrative issue. We were having trouble with completing our GST returns. Was there anything at a broader level that came out of this exercise, apart from the fact this is fixed, about us maintaining systems, our understanding of tax, GST, people with the right knowledge and skill, blah, 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 anything like that?
Absolutely. So there were lots of learnings that came out of it. I guess going back to sort of the history, just at a really high level, we've had a lot of change in staff internally. And one of the things that did highlight out of it was when you have manual processes as well as digital processes, if you have one point in contact which is not passed on, it could drop off the hoops. And I think coming back to the systems and processes is so important and critical to have that end-to-end documentation. And then of course digitisation is critical in this aspect as well, because someone relies on a report. Has it been updated? Has anyone looking at the back end of it, etc.? So yeah, lots of learnings. However, I think it's safe to say we're hopefully on the other side of the tunnel and learning from that as we go, embedding in those processes as well.
It's one of those processes that is, from a corporate knowledge perspective, open to pro-mapping.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely? Good. Okay, that's what we'd be keen to do. Rightio. Thank you. They were the sorts of the three biggies, the overall strategy and plan, Aorangi and GST. Are there any other questions, folks? Yes, Michelle.
Just on the GST issue, how confident are we that it didn't occur prior to June 2020? What was key about that date? Or is that just as far as ourselves or the IRD went back? Or, yeah.
It's a good question. So I guess we did review it backwards as well. So it wasn't just a review of that date. A number of things did internally happen around staffing and et cetera, and so it was sort of the highlight at that point in time. And we also went back to, so just for context in terms of Civica, we went back to the consultant that installed Civica 10 years ago, who was the constant. So that's the level sort of we went to understand that a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you for that, Michelle. Any other questions on the text? Yes, Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just still reading that what's coming towards us in terms of tax reform and the likes. It's obviously getting quite complex, and this is where PwC steps in. To what extent is our own tax knowledge capability within your department, and what needs do you still have there, and have you got some plans to address those that you might have?
Yes, and a very good question. And I guess as we highlighted sort of in one of the areas, we have subscribed to some things from PwC that we have access to. So internally we have that access as as part of the day-to-day queries that we can access, there's also consultants that are available to our staff. In terms of the detailed tax reforms and changes and all of that, we always refer back to PwC in that front until we can develop it, because it's important to realise that tax is not something that you can always up to date in-house, and so that is something that I think we'll keep relying on, that relationship that we have. There'll be, for example, now GST will be something we bring back in-house now that we've streamlined it, but there'll be other things that we'll still get a lot more access to experts before we go through any of those processes.
SB?
Just to that point also, so what PwC do have a tax partner and a team who have quite extensive knowledge of local government, and so we do rely, while officers will have a functional working knowledge, for instance, about what constitutes a taxable supply, we do rely on PwC to look at, say, amendments to the GST Act to tell us whether any of that will have an impact into the work we do. So, for instance, your rates demand actually constitutes a tax invoice. So if there's a change to the GST Act, we need to know that somebody, and they do that for a lot of the sector, will then come and tell us, oh, you might have to change your rates invoice because of this is a change in the GST Act or something like that. Our officers wouldn't have that level of detail or knowledge, but they would know that a rates demand constitutes a tax invoice and a rate is a taxable supply, etc. So it's a blend of them having functional knowledge, but getting it overlaid with expert knowledge by PwC, who will come and tell us these are the changes you need to make, which is the value of subscribing to a large firm like that with people dedicated and monitoring who they know are clients of theirs and who have regular contact. So it is an important part of the relationship and so on, and that contract and arrangement with PwC is an important part of our management of the risks, and it can be all sorts of risks, income tax because of what might happen in the subsidiary, FBT or whatever it is.
Right, thank you. Let's go to the resolution, which is we note and receive the report and we endorse the updated tax. Actually, sorry, that was, but I didn't go to the actual strategy. Sorry, my mistake. I knew that I was missing a point there. I'm looking for the, where is that tax strategy with the updates from TDHL? Oh, here we are, sorry. It's on page, there we go, page 120. There were some minor comments, or rather in red, which I take it as what's been agreed between officials, between management here at TDC and TDHL. I just wonder whether there was any comments the committee might or might not like to make over those. Basically, I think as your paper points out, it's about clarification of responsibilities and where they lie. And if there's better clarity on route, it's pretty hard to ignore it. It tends to make a lot of sense to me. Any comments from folk? Right, I didn't think so. Let's go for it. 1 to 2, receive, 2, endorse. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Nigel. And I'll second that. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. As I said, interesting paper, Jason. It's good advice. Not that I'm particularly interested in tax, I guess, but I suppose we have to pay it, so there we go. Now, there is no urgent business or minor business or nature, not business of a minor nature to consider, so we can skip that and go straight to the exclusion. We've got a number of matters which are in front of us in terms of public excluded. So I will put the motion for the reasons that are listed there that we move into public excluded. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Nigel. I'll put it. Or rather, is there any discussion? Sorry, I should be too quick. Is there any discussion? Sorry, guys, am I going too quickly into public excluded?
We just thought we should acknowledge, note that the auditor can remain for public.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Yes, we'd welcome John staying. If we could add that to the resolution that we just note that John will be with us. Thank you. I've moved, you're seconded. Nobody's got any comments about what we're putting in PX. In that case, I put it all those in favour. Please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you.